Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. This is organized by FACE, European Federation for Hunting and Conservation. My name is David Scallan. I'm going to be moderating this webinar really with the aim of getting the exciting range of speakers through the agenda and hosting a Q&A at the end. We will also have the opportunity for some questions to be posed after each presentation. Our entry point from the perspective of FACE is really to look at how we can enhance biodiversity in the Common Agricultural Policy. And this webinar is focusing on enhancing biodiversity and small game lessons learned from CAP post-2020. And we're really pleased to have an excellent range of panelists. With that, we will get started. First up, we have the European Commission. Have Gregorio Davila-Diaz. He's Deputy Head of Sustainability in DG AGRI from the European Commission. So please, Gregorio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. It's not my first time with this constituency. I had the pleasure also to participate in the event organized by the Spanish presidency in the south of Spain, where I learned a lot and got familiar with the challenges, opportunities, and the reality that you face and the agenda that you defend and you push for. So thank you again. I'm indeed working in DG AGRI in the environmental sustainability unit. So basically, we deal with the CAP, green architecture. So all the instruments under the CAP that helps meeting the environment and climate goals, such as eco-scheme, agro-environment, climate measures, green investments. We deal with the conditionality requirements, the famous GAEX. So this is part of the green architecture. So you can imagine we look at all the CAP strategic plans when they are amended or when they were approved, and decide if this is in line with the legal requirements, if this is ambitious enough, if it ensures consistency and level playing field. So this is typically what we normally do in the unit, but also we deal with all the legal initiatives that are coming from DG Environment, DG Clima, and DG Ener, related, of course, to agriculture. And you can imagine these were quite a number of legislation or quite pieces that came in the last Commission mandate, just to name a few, and you're very familiar with them: the Nature Restoration Law, the Industrial Emission Directive, Soil Monitoring Law, the Deforestation Regulation, and all the climate package, including the carbon farming, for example. So all these initiatives that the Commission has tabled, we are the contact point in DG AGRI to look from the farming side, to look from the rural area side, to look from the agricultural sector side. So this is our mission in DG AGRI, and that's why I read very attentively your paper on the future of the Common Agricultural Policy. And to be honest, I must recognize that I was quite pleased to see and to read many of your proposals, because to be honest, they are quite in line with what we also pursue and with what we also want to achieve for the next policy cycle. So I think you have a shared interest with our policy objective, which is the restoration of biodiversity, to preserve the habitats, the ecosystems, and therefore to bring back nature, to bring back species that have been in one way or the other damaged, or they have experienced declining trends, and that's basically in the agricultural ecosystems what we also want to achieve under the Common Agricultural Policy. So in terms of structuring a bit what I wanted to share with you, I think it was a good idea to start from your request. So to start from what you are putting forward and try to steer a discussion if the current CAP is already fit for purpose, or where would you put the focus to be a bit more ambitious in terms of biodiversity objectives. As you know, the CAP has several objectives, and that's also one of the the challenges for our policy domain. That we have to deliver on economic objectives, so on income for the farmers, on the value chain, on the markets, so to build a competitive sector. We also have to deliver on the social and societal considerations, so on regenerational renewal, on the development of rural areas, on the issues reducing pesticide use, antimicrobial use, and all these societal objectives that we currently have. And of course, we have the three specific objectives related to the environment and climate, among which one is dedicated to the restoration of ecosystems and to the promotion of biodiversity in agricultural areas. So that's a bit the challenge of the CAP, that there are many trade-offs. So as you perfectly know, the more nature you put into agricultural areas, the less competitive they become. And you've seen a very good example this year when we, in the Commission, we tabled this simplification proposal. And basically, one of the requests that you are making us on this enhanced conditionality, well, it has been removed from the conditionality layer. So I'm referring to the minimum share of land dedicated to landscape areas and features. This is something that I saw in your paper, that you would argue for this to be maintained. But in the latest simplification that we ran before the summer, this was deleted from the conditionality requirements under GAEC 8, and this was moved to the eco schemes. And in the eco schemes, as you know, these are voluntary for the farmers. All the member states now have to offer an eco schemes which is targeted to the establishment and maintenance of landscape features, and that's a new legal requirement. But of course, it depends of the farmers' willingness to engage, to subscribe. So finally, it will depend on the premium that and the compensation that they will get, and of course on how competitive and how intensive at the end of the day the farmer is. So there will not be as many hectares involved as we used to have before under the GAEC 8. So that's something in terms of political reality or context that we have to be aware. So this move from obligations under conditionality to more incentive-based mechanisms, this seems to be a reality. And for the next CAP, that's going to be one of the key issues to decide. Do we still want to have 90% of the agricultural area covered by or with minimum or basic farming practices that are beneficial for environment and climate, or we want to simply delete these obligations and to put forward support mechanisms that will, instead of imposing obligations, will reward the farmers for the practices they implement on the farm. So this is a big issue because, of course, it's also related to to the ambitions of the policy in terms of environment and climate, to the available funding, because I mean now there are many practices that are compulsory and we are not paying for them, but in the future we may envisage that there are some practices, for example, the maintenance of sensitive grasslands in Europe, that they get some type of compensation because they are delivering public goods, they are delivering ecosystem services. So how much money you put there, having in mind that we currently have an obligation for all the farmers in Europe to do these practices, which are not rewarded. So This is something on the enhanced conditionality that it's important for all to have in mind, because we currently have some conditions that are very relevant for you. So in this maintenance of permanent grasslands, we have two GAECs. GAEC 1 on the maintenance of a minimum share of permanent grassland in the member state or at regional level. And we have GAEC 9, which is on environmentally sensitive permanent grassland in Natura 2000 sites. So now we do have these rules that would ensure that there are no practices which are harmful for these grasslands, notably plowing, conversion, or drainage. No? And so there are some practices that are not allowed and that are quite important for not only for carbon sequestration and the climate objectives, but also for biodiversity restoration and biodiversity preservation. So those are the current rules. We will see what's coming up in the next policy cycle. The other part that you are also pushing for is on the voluntary schemes, right? So you know that we have two big areas where we are giving support. One is the eco schemes, and the other one is the agro-environment climate commitments, right? So the second pillar of the common agricultural policy, the rural development part, this is a long-standing support mechanism. Agro-environment climate commitments usually run for 5-7 years, which is not the case for the eco schemes, which are annual. So they are not that long-term perspective or long-term implementation cycle. But the two, they are very similar in nature. So they basically reward farmers for practices that are good for the environment and climate. And of course, here there is a big scope to improve the targeting of these practices to a specific biodiversity friendly farming practices. And I understand this is what you want to see in place. So the maintenance of biodiversity corridors, the maintenance and creation of landscape features, buffer strips, ponds, hedges, and this type of elements that are friendly for nature and species, and that also I understand that this is at the core of your concerns for the CAP. Well, currently there is 32% of the whole CAP, which more or less, just to recall, we have more or less 55 billion every year spent in the CAP. So 32% of this amount is devoted to environment and climate commitments. So it is already quite a big figure, quite a big amount. But of course, on biodiversity, it's more or less 1/3 of that. Okay, so you would more or less estimate that 10%, around 5 billion, are being used under the CAP for biodiversity friendly practices to support farmers on this. There is a scope there, and we are exploring. I don't know if you are familiar with the result-based payment working group that just finalized. Maybe, I don't know, you were part of that. It was organized by the Evaluation Help Desk, and there were many experts around the table to discuss how to put in place these result-based payments. And I also read it with great interest in your paper. And just to let you know that this is something that we also believe that can really change the way these schemes can function and to improve the efficiency. Why? Because at the end, in a result-based payment, you will reward for actually the impact. So the number of species that after a certain period of time you can find in the field. So you link the support, you link the payment to the maintenance or the increase of a species, and you let the farmer choose the best farming practice. It can be land laying fallow, it can be improved landscape features, it can be soil cover under specific times of the year, late mowing that would allow nesting of a species on the fields. So all these to be decided by the farmer, which is, I think, something that is also coming from the farming community. Let me manage my plot, let me manage my holding, but I will ensure that there are results that I'm taking care of biodiversity objectives, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I think we have to push much more in the future. There are already some specific examples that are very inspiring, and this is something that will be published very soon. All these good examples on result-based schemes that are currently up and running in Europe, and we can get inspiration from them. But of course, we will have to find better ways to support them with, I don't know, increased rates or more preferential access to funding. So this is something to be decided. And also in terms of biodiversity, another weakness that we currently have is the collective implementation. So these two combination of result-based payments and collective implementation, in terms of biodiversity, it has been proved that they are the most effective. Why? Because one farmer alone in his plot or her plot cannot really ensure that nature is back, that the species are there. It has to be implemented in a territorial basis, in a number of farmers, farms, in a number of territories that will ensure that the effects of what they're doing is actually translated in an improved status of habitats and species. And this is what the collective implementation should ensure. And there are very few, too few in my view, examples of this collective implementation that of course we have to also push for it in the future. Then you also have some issues related to land eligibility. And just to clarify maybe a bit, you're right that there may be some constraints on direct payments. So on the income support for the farmers, there may be some areas if there is no agricultural activity and if there is no active farmer behind, they are not getting the support for the income, which makes sense because the objective is the income. But you should know that for the second pillar, this is not relevant. So in the second pillar, any land manager that is implementing these practices can receive support. So under agroenvironment climate commitments, the options are much wider, the beneficiaries are also much wider, and the eligibility, therefore, it's also much wider compared to the first pillar. So I would invite you to see the opportunities of funding under the second pillar, which are, as I mentioned, less strict. And in terms of water quality and wetlands, just let me finalize a bit this intervention by briefly talking about this standard, which is related to wetlands and peatlands, because I think there we also have a common interest. This is the so-called GAEC 2. It's been one of the most difficult ones to implement because it's a new one in this CAP period. So it didn't exist before, and member states had 1st of January 2025 to get ready to implement it. Most of them are already implementing it, but there are still some that are not fully ready to start. And I think that we all need to be very attentive on how these wetlands and peatlands are being protected, because these are not only very relevant for carbon sequestration, which is the main objective of this protection of peatlands and wetlands, but also for nature and for species and habitats. So that's also a guide that I think that needs to be looked at and deserves full attention for these purposes. So in terms of the new policy making, we are running the impact assessment for the new proposal that we will be submitting to the Council and the Parliament probably by the end of next year. First, we need to know the budget. So this will come probably before the summer, and right after the CAP proposal will see the light. But of course, you all know that we have now 100 days to prepare this vision for the future of agriculture and food. And this is our immediate objective in DG AGRI to get ready for this vision, which of course will set a bit the lines for the proposal that will come afterwards. So I will leave it there. Thank you again very much for inviting me, and I would be really pleased to reply to any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gregorio. That was really useful to have a rundown on CAP implementation from the European Commission's perspective, and some of the points that you raised. I mean, for example, the results-based perspective. It's good we have Caroline on the call, who will focus her presentation on that from an Irish perspective. And all of this is very useful for the next policy cycle. So really good. Stay with us because we will have a Q&A session. Next, let's move to Kristian Sniter from the European Court of Auditors. And after Kristian, we will take Paulo Gouveia from Copa-Cogeca. So a minor switch in terms of the speaker list. Kristian, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, and do you see the presentation as well?
I see the presentation, but I see, yes, and if you go to PowerPoint slideshow, we should be, we'll have a larger
view. Can you see the slides changing?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I will start.
Yeah,
first,
Kristian, is it possible to hit slideshow so they appear a bit larger on the screen?
Okay, was working before, but okay, is that okay now?
Yes, that works. Good.
Okay, thanks a lot. I also wanted to thank you for the invitation, for speaking today at this webinar. I come from the European Court of Auditors. As you know, we are the external audit body of European institutions, and we do checks on the performance of EU policies, checks at the level of the Commission, also checks in the member states. I was asked to present our latest report on the CAP and greening. It was a report on the CAP plans, and we looked at whether they were greener than in the past and aligned with the EU's climate objectives and environment objectives. So why do an audit now? It was a very good moment for us because looking at the plans, you can make good recommendations that are valid for the phase of implementation, and so you can have an immediate effect. But at the same time, I think we come at the right moment for the discussions for the new period, the period post 2027. And we have proposed some ideas in this audit. So some more information about the audit area. So when we talk about greening agriculture, we talk about climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and also preserving biodiversity. On adaptation, farmers will have to adapt to more extreme weather conditions, and this will most likely have an impact on their income. And you know that preserving farmers' income is also an objective of the CAP. The Commission had produced a study that estimated that maybe up to 16% of farmers' income could be affected by climate change. Climate change is also about mitigation. It's a sector, agriculture, that represents 13% of emissions, overall EU emissions. And it's expected that this sector will also contribute to the climate neutrality objective for 2050. And on the environment, there is a strong link between intensification and biodiversity loss. You know about the Farmland Bird Index that measures the presence of farmland birds on the fields. This index has been going down steadily since 1990, and we're now at minus 40%. So it shows that there is still an issue there. And finally, as we are auditors, we care about the money, about the budget. There is 123 billion euros for the climate for this period, the programming period, which is about 47% of the budget. And 17% also go to biodiversity. So a lot of money is put on this policy. So we had to define what a green policy was, and we know that the Commission wanted it to be substantially greener, this new CAP. And the first question we asked ourselves was whether it was greener than in the past, in the previous period. So we did compare the two periods. Then we looked a bit more forward using the Green Deal targets to see how much the CAP plans were aligned with these Green Deal goals. And the third question was about the performance monitoring framework. You need good performance monitoring of the green objectives to see whether you are achieving results, which is in the end the objective. We did our checks at Commission level, obviously, and in 4 member states, as you can see on the screen. So we went to Ireland, we went to Spain, France, and Poland. These were mostly big member states, big recipients of EU funds. So our main conclusion is that the plans for this period, for 2023-2027, are greener than the previous period, which is a positive element. But at the same time, they do not match the EU's ambitions for climate and the environment. And we also see some weaknesses in the performance monitoring system. Now I'll go a bit more in details in these 3 points. So what is greener? It's the new architecture. The elements we had in the previous CAP, with the green elements, were cross-compliance and greening. These were integrated in the first layer of conditionality. And then building on this first layer, you have the eco schemes that provide an additional contribution. And you know that they are about 1/4 of the direct payments. So they're also quite significant. There's quite a significant amount of money to support eco schemes. But of course, it's also dependent on how these eco schemes were built in the plans. And we had a look at how the Commission reviewed the plans. They did quite extensive work providing guidance, checking what the member states had done, providing some comments. But we saw that member states covered about 2/3 of the comments, and in 1/3, the Commission's comments were not followed up. Mostly using the argument that the member states had other policies in place at national level, which for us is a bit of a lost opportunity. You could have used the EU budget to support these national policies and these common goals. In the end, we found the plans not to be substantially greener. There were examples of eco schemes where the requirements were not too high in order that most farmers could receive the money and respect the conditions, and we found this case in several member states. And of course, there's also the changes introduced last May that reduced the conditionality on green requirements. Now about alignment with the Green Deal, there were 5 main Green Deal objectives that we could check performance against. One was about having more organic farming. The next one was about reducing nutrient losses, reducing pesticides, having more high diversity landscapes, and of course, the binding target of reducing emissions. Unfortunately, these targets were not integrated in the CAP legislation, so there were no real requirements for member states to say how much quantitatively they were contributing to these targets, and we found very few estimates of this contribution in the plans, except for organic farming, for which there is a specific performance indicator. But then looking at this performance indicator, we saw that the most likely outcome would be that the target of 2030 would not be achieved. You would need to double the pace of the increase of organic farming. For the other indicators, we also had some issues. I'll not go into all of them, but also the European Environment Agency confirmed this judgment on some of them. Now, in the last part of the report on the green monitoring framework, there was some improvement in the framework globally, a more coherent one, but still the specific objectives are not very clearly defined, and we lack some quantitative targets, quantitative indicators to measure the results. Many of the indicators still reflect output rather than results. So we know how many hectares were subsidized, but we don't know exactly if, for instance, the greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced. So these were key limitations to make the link between the amount of funding and the results achieved. So now I'll move to our recommendations. The first recommendation is immediately applicable, is a proposal to exchange good practices, good green practices, in particular in eco schemes, which are a new scheme, and member states are trying and testing different approaches, and there are lessons to be learned there. But we also think that other practices could be part of these green good practice exchanges. In particular, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, some collaboration at local level on how to improve the biodiversity. The second recommendation was about the contribution to Green Deal targets. The Commission will produce next year, at the end of next year, a report to Parliament on the CAP, and we asked them to measure the contribution of the CAP to the Green Deal targets in this report. They said they would do so, and except for two areas where they would have problems having the data, which is the pesticides and the nutrient losses, for which there is no data available to measure the CAP's contribution. And finally, and also very importantly, we thought about a new framework, and for post-2027, we would expect that the legislator puts in the legislation the EU green goals and asks the member states to better quantify, better make a link between these goals and their plans, so that then the plans can be compared using fair and objective criteria, and also that the performance of the implementation of the plans can be checked against relevant result indicators. So I will stop my presentation here, and I'm available to answer any question you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristian. That's also very helpful and provides some very good context for the next presentations as well. There's 90 or so attendees, so please feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat function. Next up, we have Paulo Gouveia, who is the Chief Policy Advisor for Copa-Cogeca. And we generally say conservation works when people support it, and I think this is relevant in the context of the CAP, the views of Copa-Cogeca in terms of lessons learned from CAP post-2020. Paulo will have to leave us at 4 o'clock, so if there are any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and Paulo can take them following his presentation. So over to you, Paulo, and welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon to everyone. And of course, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation, and I'll try to give within my allocated time a general overview on this. And I mean, you are picking at it from the angle of lessons regarding small game and biodiversity. Well, I have to say I'm not a hunter, so in terms of small game, I can't bring much insights into the discussion. But what I would like to stress here, and I mean, this is not really a surprise regarding what everybody is pretty much working on, is already on the future CAP. We are about to have the new commission formally in place from the 1st of December. The vote took place in the European Parliament yesterday, so everything is being finalized for the formal start. And we also heard what Gregorio told us some minutes ago, that one of the tasks that Commissioner Hansen has in his portfolio is to present a vision for the future of agriculture within the first 100 days of his mandate. So besides that, and if you look at also other legislative proposals that are expected, that Gregorio also mentioned, such as the future MFF and the future CAP, we see that everybody is pretty much focusing on this with a view to have their views by, let's say, well, at least earlier than this time next year when these proposals are expected. And so the thing is also from our side in terms of Copa-Cogeca, we are looking at this and we are trying to develop our thinking, going a bit more into the nitty-gritty, into details of some of the measures that we want the next CAP to have. But for us, what is important is that this vision that everybody is looking at and considering, and so are we, needs to be done in a way that ensures a fair competitive environment for farmers and agri-cooperatives, whilst balancing the three main pillars of sustainability. So this is quite important, and we put a lot of emphasis on a balanced approach between the three pillars of sustainability. And the bottom line is simple. If a farmer is not economically sustainable, he will not be able to contribute to the other two pillars of sustainability. So this is quite important to take into consideration. There is also another element that I would like to refer. Now, at the end of 2024, we are at the beginning of a new Commission mandate. We are in a significantly different world than we were at the end of 2019. In the meantime, let's not forget that in the meantime, we had to endure the COVID pandemic, energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, rising inflation, rising input cost prices, more recently, but already more than a year ago, this conflict in the Middle East. So with extreme weather events that cropped up in the meantime, so we are in a situation on the ground where things did not really occur as planned. And why do I refer here the planning? Simply because this CAP that we are having is reaching the end of the second year of implementation. Let's not forget that this CAP started on the 1st of January 2023. So the bottom line with this is that it's still, from my point of view, too early to have quantified and qualified assessment of what is being executed. We know, and the Commission and the Parliament, they, among others, they carried out analysis and studies on what was planned in the different national strategic plans, all 28 of them. But that is what was planned. We don't know exactly what was executed and what can be taken out of this. But for us, there are a number of, let's say, principles or critical aspects that we need to have in the next CAP. We need to address the competitiveness of the sector and how this will contribute to the union's economic growth. This I don't want to enter into much more details now, but this relates also to the global positioning of the EU and its economic growth. Then we need to clearly ensure that farmers have a fair income in their businesses, and how their activity relates to the rest, the entirety of the Union, and even with the third countries. And it was mentioned, I believe, by Gregorio, that farmers' income is still significantly below the average of other sectors of the economy, whilst this is one of the key objectives set out in the Article 39 of the Treaty for the functioning of the Union. Then we need aspects such as the a fair and balancing operation of the food chain, because this is a critical way of guaranteeing that whatever farmers produce is adequately remunerated by the market. And we need to get rid of unfair trading practices that we constantly see. Then other aspects such as maintaining the diversity of producing, maintaining the possibility of carrying out agriculture-related activities throughout the EU territory. And this is something that also impacts on biodiversity. And this is also something that we very much support. So I could also continue to refer to other elements, but there is one that is absolutely crucial. We need to effectively put in place a strategy that will bring about generation renewal in the sector. And this is fundamental, because otherwise, in 10 years' time, we will have a very much reduced population, farming population working in the agricultural sector. And how will we want to have an efficient delivery of all these sustainability objectives that we have in the policy if we don't have the people on the ground that will do it. And again, it's to do this, you need to guarantee that the standards of living and the quality of life is there in rural areas for the young generation to uptake. So at the end of the day, there is a clear link between the budget, the overall budget of the Union, and the budget that you dedicate to agriculture policies, and the agriculture policies in all its components. And let me refer that, like Gregorio said, that the specific objectives of the CAP, they cover the 3 pillars of sustainability that will bring all this together. So, but I would like to caution on one aspect. We are just barely 2 years into the implementation of this policy. I would say that it's basically impossible to have quantified assessment of this. And I would like to remind you what happened in the previous CAP. At that time, barely 1 year after the implementation of the policy, the Commission launched an assessment of the greening measures. Barely 1 year into it. What was the outcome? It didn't conclude anything. Not even after 2 years. I mean, we are talking about processes, biological processes, and they take long to see the results. I'm not saying that we don't that we shouldn't do them. Yes, we are committed to it, but we need to be realistic and consider that any actions will take time until we see clear outcomes and results. So let's not make the same mistake again. And whilst we should look at things, but this is not the moment to start putting pressure on quantifying things that at this moment cannot be quantified. So that is my parting message, and I hope that I didn't overshoot my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo. It's essential to have the views of the European farmers and agri cooperatives. So no problem with the time. And I think it's also important, very important contextual information as we look towards the next policy cycle. So thank you very much, Paulo. I know you have to drop off at 4 for another meeting, but with that, no problem. With that, I don't see any questions or comments, so I would like to move forward. Sebastian Lakner, who is Professor of Agricultural Economics at the University of Rostock in Germany. Thank you very much for joining the webinar, and please, the floor is yours.
So thank you, David. First of all, best regards from northeastern Germany. We are right at the Baltic Sea, and thank you for the invitation and this interesting webinar. I'm trying to shed a light on the support of biodiversity in the CAP from an academic perspective, status quo and how to move forward. It's also partly based on our long year work on the fitness check of the CAP. So we analyzed to what extent the CAP is fit for its purposes. We'll focus on biodiversity, and we'll have basically 4 statements. First statement is the EU has made constant efforts to extend agri-environmental policies in the last 20 years. So not everything is bad, but success is a bit mixed. First of all, as a short remark also to the Commission, it's not 32. I don't see that payments for areas of natural constraints are an environmental measure. You support anything in those regions. So it's not environment. If you calculate the share of environment, you might end up with 24 or even 26%. That depends a little bit. And you can also see from this graph that this share has increased, and the yellow bar, the greening, was not really, I mean, can refer to Kristian here, to the Court of Auditors, which basically said it's just a complicated variation of income support. So that is an improvement. Still, we can structurally observe problems. We spend most of our money in the least effective parts of the agri-environmental support. This can be seen by greening, and it doesn't matter whether you test greening in the first, in the second, or in the 7th year, because first of all, farmers did not change anything on their decisions. You can show that from data, and from the first year, it was pretty clear that the largest part of the greening would not have big effects on its targets. So we spent most of the money in ineffective greening, and still this is not well researched. So this is something we need to investigate. To what extent is that valid in the eco schemes? And in the eco schemes, it might be nuanced, because here you have many member states with many measures, so it might be a bit better. But still, we do not spend so much money on the agri-environmental measures, and we spend the least money on Natura 2000. So we still need to align the CAP to those important measures. And this is not done yet, and this is getting more emphasis with regards to the nature restoration law. I'm skipping the next slide, which simply says part of the equation is also that we spend coupled support, which is contradictory to environmental spending. Still, the current CAP framework allows ambitious implementations. So this is the second statement. You can do a lot with that, and we've showed that in this paper. So it's a question of national priorities if you are really effective in biodiversity support. We investigated that for Germany, and you can show that the ambitious requirements with high payments, they have been increased in Pillar 2. That has mostly doubled the spending from the from 2 previous reforms to the previous CAP spending period. Still, it's the same story here. We need to investigate the current state of the CAP, and it might still be extended. Would be my hypothesis. You can also show from this data that the biodiversity spending had been slightly increased. So you see a shift into the right direction, but still a lot of that is pretty inefficient. And so this statement number 3, political ambition had been currently decreasing. So we are observing a worrying ecological rollback. And this is something we need to take serious. So we can't just argue, well, we made life easier for farmers because there was such a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, if you look into studies, where's bureaucracy coming from for practical farmers? And there is a study for Germany showing that the largest part is based on national law and on the implementation of animal registration stuff. And now if you just cancel GAIC 8, there's no big contribution to simplification. So this was just, let's say, a false claim that this is simplification, and it did damage to environment. So the farmers' protests, they have worked, but in a way which is not good for society, because the 4% follow land was cancelled, and the only reaction from the Commission, and this is pretty thin, is that you have the statement, well, if member states do not have any support, they should do some support, but no mentioning how and from what money. And we had exactly the debate in Germany that shall we increase the budget for Eco Scheme 1, which is support of fallow land in the Eco Scheme, and there was no additional money done to it. So this is problematic. And then you have other problematic stuff, like there's less grassland protection, and also the other details of canceling the sustainable use regulation is not a good signal. I understand that this was, well, there were debates on that. That was not maybe not the best draft, but it was withdrawn, and even the nature restoration law was watered down. So still we need to pick up the path where we say, well, we have a number of environmental challenges and we need to do something about that. And I will show you also a very short figure on that. What could be the implication? This is basically, if you look on the right-hand side, the development of grassland, and you can see that this lowering of grassland by the time was, let's say, stopped after 2013 in Germany. So we stabilized our shares of grassland. And with this new regulation, you open a door. And I mean, this is, of course, a worst case scenario. I don't think that this will happen like this. But if you allow flexibility in that area, this is problematic. And the recommendation from science then was, well, guys from the national government, do national laws on that and don't wait for the EU. And this is not a good signal. We should have common rules on the European market on that. And the same holds for the fallow land, but I will skip this part. So number 4 is we have a number of farmers' motivations, and bureaucracy and low participation remain an obstacle. So we need to think from farmers' perspective. We need a better mindset, and we need to bring farmers along. So if you look into the big challenges and the potential solution, still in the agri-environmental support, according to my perception, too much business as usual, too little innovation. So we need to have more fine-tuning on the targets on green infrastructure. Things like planning on the landscape levels and cooperative implementation, those are good measures, I think. But there is also something which is crucial for the green infrastructure in the landscape. And this is, I mean, this is important for small gain. And that is if you want to reinstall green infrastructure like landscape element, but the same is true for peatland rewetting. You might have current support of the, let's say, income foregone, but we are lacking on instruments who grant support on the investment, and the investment is the problem, not the ongoing support. So we are lacking investment support, and it's not that the EU has not offered those support. It is in the current framework, it is possible, but the member states do too little on that. And then you have monitoring problems. National co-funding is not helpful. So the most easiest measures, eco schemes, come with no co-funding obligation, whereas the second pillar, the measures which are much more effective in biodiversity terms, they need co-funding. So even that rule is not proportionate. And administration transaction costs are also a problem. Let's have a short look on what could be solutions. Or recommendations, and this is based on many studies. I try to cite some of them. Extend the complex measures because they work in terms of biodiversity. Do coherence with Natura 2000 and nature restoration law. That's important. Planning at landscape level is important. We have some projects on that going, and farmers are interested in that. So collective implementation, and this is something where I could strongly agree to Gregorio. This is a good option. So let's go into that direction. We have a model on with point system. That's also something which farmer like. It's also an innovation. So, then result-based payment and extension services. So we had a project where farmers were specifically asking for a CAP model, which is more based on extension services, and that could be helpful. Field edges, sites could be helpful. And finally, let's develop a market for conservation products, because that might also help to monitorize the biodiversity support. So some of our papers here. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Really good to get from implementation to the review of the European Court of Auditors to Copa-Cogeca and to the detail of how things are working with respect to biodiversity. And also, I can also see a question in the chat. You mentioned a market for conservation products, so you can come back to that with other colleagues. There's been a few references now also in your presentation, Sebastian, to the results-based approach. And I think one thing that's useful and useful to reflect on is the current CAP allows really nice things to be done. And that's the point you made early in your presentation. And now I think it's very useful that we have Dr. Caroline Sullivan to talk about the Irish approach, which has been, in some ways, Ireland has been quite ambitious in comparison to some other member states with the results-based approach. So Caroline, the floor is yours. Yeah, you're on mute, apologies. If that was the host or...
Yeah, it's simple. Just untick the box, Caroline. Thank you, David. And I think thank you, the other speakers, for setting this presentation up quite nicely from the policy perspective through to the audit and research perspective. And now I'm going to talk about the implementation or practitioner's perspective. If this will move forward for me. So I'm going to talk about results-based schemes in Ireland. They were part of an ambitious CSP for 2023 to 2027. And within that results-based scheme was written in as the AACM measure, and it's called ACRES in Ireland. ACRES CP is an even more ambitious version of ACRES General, and there are over 20,000 farmers in this scheme at the moment. And it's focused on high nature value farmland areas. So it's important to mention that it's very focused, but it could be applied in different areas for sure. The scorecards are designed for the lands in these areas, and they're designed to optimize the delivery of ecosystem services. I work for the Hen Harrier Project Limited, and we deal with about 7,400 farmers in the area in green there. You can see the numbers in each of the areas across the country. So each of the areas have around 3,000 farmers in them, except for the East Coast and the Burren. And I suppose just to mention again, I know Sebastian mentioned results-based, but it's payment contingent on the delivery of something tangible. And I suppose that's beneficial from an auditor perspective as well. If the habitat is in good condition and it's providing the associated ecosystem services, then you get a payment. And we measure this through the structure and components of plant communities and other habitat features that are present in the field. The assessed features, from our perspective, must be obvious throughout the assessment season, and that's June 1st to August 31st for most grazed habitats in Ireland. Of course, that would change depending on the country and the habitat target, if that was to be implemented elsewhere on a large scale. Features that contribute to ecological integrity gain points, and damaging activities or serious pressures reduce available points. And I suppose an important element of that is it's very easy for farmers to understand that. We do have a long history of results-based agri-environment schemes in Ireland, from the Burren programme in the early 2000s through to some very innovative EIPs from 2017 onwards. But I suppose just because we have a long history, I don't think every country needs to have that long history. We have made some mistakes that others can learn from and avoid from the beginning, which I think is really important. There are 4 main scorecards that we use in ACRES, and in Ireland today they're grassland, rough grazing, which is rushy wet pastures, peatland and scrub woodland. And we found that they can be applied to the majority of Irish farmland. So you don't need 25 or 30 scorecards. You can apply them on a large area without too much difficulty or too much complexity. Other scorecards can be designed for species with specific requirements or nationally common farmed habitats. You can easily develop one for arable land or connective habitats or whatever your target is. We do have other examples, more bird-focused examples, or we have another low-input peat grassland example, which is specifically to support raised bogs. All the scorecards are designed to deliver for biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water quality, soil quality, flood resilience, and fire resilience. And you might be scratching your head thinking, how can you deliver all those things with just one scorecard? But I think we can and do. So what is the scheme has been applied in Ireland since the start of 2023. And what that means is we now have 1 million hectares of land that's been scored. These are high level health qualitative assessments of farmland. And higher scoring lands are delivering key ecosystem services. There's no question there. Lower scoring lands may have non-target ecosystem delivery focus, like food, or they may have issues that need to be targeted. And all you need is someone to examine that and see which of the two need to be focused on. What we found is, and I manage one of these results-based programs, results-based payment schemes teams, is that we're this intermediary that translate policy for the person on the ground, and we take messages from the person on the ground and feedback to policy. And I think that's really important. Farmers need support to maximize their scores and their payments. And we have a multidisciplinary team that help them do that. They're agriculturalists, ecologists, water quality experts. And we interpret the data that comes back to us, and we make recommendations on actions that should be done on farms to improve the situation on the ground. The teams are also there to valorize the positive. So farmers are kind of sick of hearing negatives all the time. They feel like they're being bashed, but we're in a very effective position to valorize the things that they are doing right for biodiversity, for water quality, or just for engaging, because that has to be commended a lot as well. And how can they do this? How can we do this effectively? So I'm just going to give a quick example from the region that I'm managing. So the first thing we did was we developed a local action plan. That's just taking all the data that we know about an area and seeing what are the key things that this area can deliver from a natural resources perspective. This is the Breifne CP area. There are about 3,000 farmers in this region, and it covers about 80,000 hectares of land. And we have project officers assigned to specific regions. The local action plan then is a compilation of data that identifies key environmental assets on farms. So the different colors represent different combinations of objectives. It's a bit nauseating looking at that map, but it just shows that we have about 12 objectives across the whole region. But it's best to focus on the local and the farm scale to see what you can do on a practical level. So if we just focus in on this area here, you can see there are lots of different objectives in a small local area, and they can vary from in the uplands, you might have water quality, peatland, raptors, and red grouse all being competing or co-objectives in an area. In some areas further to the south, you might have water quality around the lake. And then you'll notice that green area where you can see it's not just water quality, but geese and swans also need to be taken into account there. So it's a really neat way of visualizing the competing objectives or the resources in an area. And what we do is we take the local action plan, we get the scorecard results, and then we have data on how and where the objectives are being delivered. And that helps us to prioritize the right action in the right place. So just to, again, to help you visualize that, this is a sample of the data that you get back when you have results-based data. So there's a score per field. If I color code them where dark green is the best quality, 10 out of 10 in some cases, to red being a non-payable score, less than 3, less than 4, you can easily see on the landscape where do you need to focus your efforts. There are 4 red fields in a row there. In the uplands, they look okay, but there's this red field near on the right-hand side. And there's this very large, low-scoring parcel here. So what do we do with that? Well, very simply, we encourage the farmers to apply for actions to address issues on those parcels. In this area where you've got water quality and geese and swans, you've got a water course and 4 fields that don't have a good score there. So if we address a water quality issue by planting riparian field margins, that might increase the score of those fields. But we need to be cognizant that there's a geese and swan objective here also, and the riparian field margins, while they might benefit water quality, would cut off access to that valuable resource for the geese and swans. And so the team wouldn't recommend or approve riparian margins in that instance. They would look at promoting solar pumps, water trucks, and drinkers to address the water quality issue in another way. Similarly, if you look at this example where the objective is water quality and that green area there in the middle of the orangey color, semi-natural grasslands are also important. Well, the farmer might apply to plant trees, to plant a small woodland in a really green field there. We would assess that. Trees are good. Trees are something you want to promote in the landscape, but not at the expense of rare semi-natural grassland. The scorecard indicates to us that there's a high number of positive indicators here, and so we wouldn't allow planting of a woodland there, But on assessment of the farm, we would say, look, there's a more intensive field there in yellow. That might be a much better site for your tree planting. So we don't want to just say no tree planting. We just want it to be in the most appropriate place. I'm almost finished, David, even though I'm late. So these data are very valuable, but they do require knowledge of the objectives within a landscape. Like, where is the small game going to benefit most from the actions you are promoting? A land manager must know their field scores, and they should have access to funding for actions. And then you do need a team or a kind of a translator to understand the objectives and to engage with the land managers to get the details and context of what's going on in the local area. And it's always good to remember other land use issues are always at play. We work to connect farmers with other stakeholders or organizations that can assist with these. But regardless, we work with farmers and forestry, tourism and recreation, or whatever else might be going on in an area that needs to be taken into account from a land use policy perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That's very helpful to finish the speaker presentations, where we really get into action and see, I think, on a more positive message how things can work. And I think it's also in the context of the flexibility and the way in which a locally designed approach can be developed. And of course, the hunting community can be very interested and supportive, because we can see an interest in schemes, for example, that target ground nesting birds that need an element of habitat conservation management plus nest protection, where you can rely on the support of the local hunting club for predator management, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and Ireland is a good place to look, I think. So thank you very much for that. We have 15 minutes. We have a number of questions that have been posed. Anton has asked a question about some retailers and processors are paying more when they buy from farmers who achieve environmental and biodiversity criteria. So should this blended financing not be promoted further? And it can solve some challenges. There's another question from Sarah about enhancing farmer acceptance, more stability, in particular measures, but mostly payments per hectare is needed, and that farmers can no longer have confidence in the cap and the constant rule changes. A question from Darius, more generally in the context of how we can have a focus on cap on biodiversity and how future measures can enhance biodiversity at the small game level. And nice, there's a mention to grey partridge, which is a bird that's had a spectacular decline of 94% in the last 4 decades. And another question more targeted to Caroline about scope to open the AGRI scheme to support non-farmers, i.e. local hunting clubs who manage ponds or look after heather on state-owned forestry. So good, we have a few questions there. What I would like to do, I mean, maybe we start initially with the European Commission. Maybe you can give some reflections on some of these questions, and also feel free to give some reflections on the speaker presentations. And then I think we can move to Kristian, Sebastian, and Caroline as well. That should probably take us towards 4:30. So over to you, Gregorio.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, and especially to all the presenters, which has been very, very interesting. So I will directly go to the questions that have been put in the chat. So first of all, this blending of public-private support, yeah, this is definitely something that we need to pursue and to promote more in the next policy cycle. There are already existing initiatives, so you all know the carbon removal certificate framework, so the carbon farming credits that currently the methodologies are being discussed among the experts, and we hope to have a clear method in the future so that private investors can already well, support and buy these credits from the farmers and other land managers, and that could, well, be used on top of the CAP support in order to reward the carbon sequestration. As you know, carbon certificates, they have to ensure co-benefits on biodiversity. This was something that remained in this regulation, which in a way means that these credits also have to be beneficial for biodiversity, and this has to be ensured in the design and in the way that the credits and the practices are implemented. You know that many of these carbon sequestrations are very good for biodiversity. So just to name soil cover, for example, agroforestry, landscape features, these are all practices that are good for carbon sequestration, and they can therefore obtain credit for that. And they are also helping the promotion or preservation of biodiversity. Of course, as you may know, there are already some thinking ongoing on biodiversity credits and how, I mean, you followed the latest discussions on the COP, I don't know which one is it anymore. I think it was COP16 on the global biodiversity framework with a new pledge for additional funding for this type of private-led instruments. Apparently, there is a lot of money around there at global scale that is looking for vehicles in order to well, support biodiversity practices and also, you know, many actors in the economy, they are trying to offset emissions, and these credits can also be useful for them. So it will be a win-win scenario. I would say 3 wins. So for nature, for farmers and land managers, and also for the climate as a whole. So that's something that we are also reflecting upon. And of course, I mean, we are very used to blending instruments coming also from financial instruments. We are also working a lot with the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund to blend the guarantees loans together with the investment support that is being used under the CAP and other EU funds. So there is still a lot to do. We know that this is not always that easy, and that the rules are many, and sometimes they are not so consistent. So this is for sure something that will have to be further promoted. Then on the acceptance and the stability, yeah, we all agree that many actors want the stability and predictability of the CAP. I think we went through well, quite a change in the last reform, and we hear the voices of stability of the rules, stability of the governance systems, the stability of the payments. So, well, this is a political decision, of course, how far we go, and in terms of changing priorities, but we take no note of these voices. We know that they are there, and we all agree that farmers are a bit fed up with these changing rules all the time. So we have to ensure a predictable framework that they can also anticipate their choices and decisions. So I think that's important. As regards the biodiversity and the small game level, and in particular on the gray partridge. So as you see, I didn't talk about the concrete practices that we are supporting, but there are very good documents available on, for example, the mapping of the CAP strategic plans, or the report we sent to the Council and the Parliament at the end of 2023, where you will see much more details on the practices that we are supported. We are supporting under voluntary schemes, and you will see that many of these are beneficial for this biodiversity and for the species. So just to mention a few. So, and you know, the land laying fallow, even if GAEK has been removed, there is still a lot of voluntary schemes that are supporting farmers, and now there will be more because there is an obligation for all the member states. And just maybe to refer to Sebastian's presentation, let's not forget that this new obligation for an eco scheme is wider in scope than the GAEK 8 that was removed. The GAEK 8 was only about maintenance of landscape features, and the new obligation for the eco scheme is also for the establishment of new landscape features, which was not the case on the GAEC. So we still don't know. I think we have to be very prudent in drawing conclusions, because really we don't have the data, we don't have the implementation of the CAP plans, as also mentioned by the by the COPA representative. So I think it's a bit of a speculation. What is the impact of this removal of GAEC in terms of environment and climate? But these support mechanisms are there. There are several. I think, if I'm talking from the top of my head, but I think it's 17% of European farmland getting support for biodiversity practices. Of course, this has to go a bit up in the future, but in terms of species and small game species, this is what we have to do to protect more nature and to be more compatible with the existence of these species on agricultural ecosystems. Well, and finally, and then I will let other speakers also join, of course, on the lack of innovation. This is something which is key. We really perceive that farmers are not engaging sometimes because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the assistance and the support. So this is why the advisory services also is something that has to be better used in the future. And farmers need to know a bit, much more, what are the practices that are not only economically viable, but also more sustainable in terms of environment and climate. So for this purpose, we have several ideas on how to accompany better the farmers. Just let me briefly mention the EIP AGRI, so the European Investment Partnership. I guess that you know this instrument. It brings together farmers, research, academia, and industry in very, very small projects. I think we are in about 2,000 projects in Europe currently being implemented to provide very specific solutions on how to do better things or how to tackle specific challenges. There is more to do on innovation, but there are already some tools out there. I will leave it there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregorio. That's useful. I'm conscious of time, but we may go 5 minutes over, but I think it's important. I've posed just 4 questions, and there's a couple more questions coming in. So the panelists can be a bit selective if you wish. Kristian, from your side, feel free to give some reflection.
Just make a general remark a bit to conclude. I mean, we have some big figures. I mean, we know that there are issues with climate mitigation. The emissions are not going down in the sector. We have issues with biodiversity indicators. They're still in a decreasing trend and no sign of reversing on farmland biodiversity. We know also that there's a lot of money being invested, CAP money for climate and for biodiversity, when we discussed the figures earlier on. So what is missing is to understand the results that we achieve with this money. Why we are not achieving the results that can lead to changing these overall indicators and improve the situation for biodiversity. And the solution might be at a very local level. I mean, in understanding what are the farmers' constraints, what are their costs, why they are not on board and changing their practices, but also understanding nature better. What does nature need to improve, and how can farmers contribute to this? So, and we pointed a bit to this in our report. There's the need to better understand, the cost side for the farmers and the benefit side for nature, and to make sure that they work hand in hand. And this can be done, I think, mostly on quite a local level. And I think the example in Ireland was very interesting from this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristian. Sebastian, feel free to reflect on some of these questions and the presentations overall.
I mean, Caroline, you were last. You had to wait the longest. Do you want to step in before me? No? Okay. Okay, some remarks. First, there was this question of let's say, this blending, or also this market orientation. I guess this is a huge field of work where we can substantially improve the farmers who are active, because we have many farmers who are really, really active. They do a good job and they have difficulties if they keep animals to sell them. And I know a number of examples where farmers make advertisement with the fact that they are preserving biodiversity. And we have even in Eastern Germany a labeling system. And I will later on answer on the chat and post the link on that. It's Landwirtschaft für die Artenvielfalt. And it's a system where you have specific rules and you test the farms. It's adding on organic farming. And you can even buy those products, and the farmers get a top-up payment at the market, so you can buy those products in supermarket. And that's a very innovative system, because there farmers get remunerated for their engagement, and that is important. You need to create markets for those public goods. So you need labeling system, and maybe this is something to do research on at the European level, because some single systems work. This is the one remark I wanted to do. The second remark, which I liked also about Caroline's presentation, and that is also interesting on a European level. I mean, we are searching for systems, for innovative systems where you kind of can report later on what you have done by CAP money. So also understanding what is the impact of CAP money. And that is important for the Commission to report what is important, and also for the member states. And the good thing, if you have point system, or if you have a system established like the one in Ireland, you can show even on maps what is done where and on which quality. And this is something that is innovative. So result-based payments can really help there, but also the system which is developed in Germany and which is they are discussing to implement it in northern Germany, point system where farmers report what they have done, and then later on you can do longer reports what has been done on the national level, and try to report on public goods and on biodiversity. So that can help is remark 2. Remark 3, let us stress the role of land and conservation managers and consulting system. Consultancy is so important, because many farmers feel insecure if they are faced with biodiversity measures. And we have made the experience in many projects that it helps to have competent people who are helping the farmers. So a system which supports this consultancy is really key to achieve targets and to improve the situation. So and that was also brought up by farmers. So I guess this is number 3, third remark. So thanks.
Thank you, Sebastian. Caroline, over to you.
Yeah, look, again, as long as the policy supports a system whereby the farmer has a clear understanding of what policy is looking from them, and there's a clear route for them delivering it without bureaucracy and without judgment if they choose to not follow a direct route, or to not do exactly what farmers have to be able to do what suits them and their land. And just because in a voluntary scheme we usually just provide them with the right information, or with information on how they can improve their payment, and there's no judgment if they choose not to do that. But a very high proportion of farmers respond very well to that and do things that improve their scores, because at the end of the day, it's about the bottom line. And if they do certain things that are beneficial for their farm and their pocket, that also benefit biodiversity and the ecosystem services they can deliver, then they will do that. And it's just simple as putting the systems in place to support them in doing that.
Excellent. We are at the point of conclusion. I wish to thank all of the speakers for very good presentations. At the moment, from let's say a Brussels stakeholder perspective, we have all eyes on what the next CAP policy cycle is going to look like. Many interest groups have different entry points there. But I think during this webinar, we've certainly taken away a lot. And I think the important message is there's a lot we can learn, lessons learned from the CAP implementation post-2020. So this has been really useful. Something from a FACE perspective, our entry point, as I said at the beginning, is really to try and solve some of the challenges associated with small wild game, which is a real problem for sustainable hunting when many of these populations are decreasing. And the CAP is such an important policy that can, and it has the framework in the current CAP to deliver for biodiversity, and we can see some examples of that. And I guess the big question is trying to inject more ambition into that. But with that, I'd like to thank you all. We've had 100+ registrations. I think we had about over 90 attendees join the webinar. The recording will be available afterwards. We will issue a statement after this with some quotations from the speakers. And thank you very much again from those tuned in at home or in your offices, and to the speakers again. It's been very useful. So many thanks. And with that, have a good afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very
And
much.
get in touch if you want to know any more about results-based program implementation. Happy to answer questions.
Super. Thank you, Caroline. All right, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.